Hello and welcome to the VentureForth podcast. I'm your host, Joe Mahavutivani. We'll be chatting with some of the most interesting founders, startups, and VCs about the experiences that led them to where they are today, what they're currently working on, as well as the journey ahead of them. On today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Tony Conrad, a partner at True Ventures and co-founder of two companies acquired by AOL, About.me and Sphere. He's an avid traveler, philanthropist, and triathlete, and has a very interesting background that includes short stints in some very eclectic roles that would be really interesting to dive into, actually. I had the pleasure of meeting Tony and learning about his history as part of the NewCo conference, and was fascinated by his history and how he made decisions to invest in some of today's most well-known and well-loved brands like WordPress, Fitbit, and Blue Bottle Coffee. Jeff Clavier says that Tony is one of the few guys who figured out how to be both a great entrepreneur and a great VC, and in my own experience found that Tony was one of the most humble and relaxing investors I've ever spoken to. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate that, Joe. I'm blushing.
Yeah, so before diving in, I'd love to start by hearing a little bit about your background and the road leading to True.
Well, I grew up in a small farming community in the northeastern part of Indiana, a town of about 5,000 to 6,000 people in a good year. And after that, spent time living abroad. I spent time in New Delhi, then spent 4 years in Paris, and then I worked in Jakarta, Indonesia for about another 4 years. And then eventually found my way here to the West Coast in 1996, 1997, and became a venture investor. A pretty good, fun time to enter into the venture capital industry. And, got lucky. I think you'd have to be pretty unskilled to have been lucky in that time period, or not to have been lucky in that time period. But, as it is, it taught me a lot about the industry and went through some really kind of brutal times in the back part of the 90s and the early 2000 time frame, but, kept at it, and it's kind of all worked out, kind of since then.
How is growing up in the small farming community out in Indiana, how has that contributed to who you are today?
Well, it's been profoundly important for me. Where I grew up, I think it was 9 kids out of 122 in my graduating class went to college. So, it's not an environment in which this path or this outcome is at all obvious or even really kind of possible in a lot of ways. Having said that, the amazing thing about where I grew up was, I had an amazing family. I'm very fortunate. I don't have any tragic story, about my family. I love them dearly, and they've been incredibly supportive. But because I think I was always a little bit geared differently than a lot of the other people in that community, there was really just a tremendous amount of opportunity to get involved in things and to do things and kind of invent a little bit my own opportunity, if you want. I did lots of different odd jobs. I've done everything from being the classic lawnmower person to working in a pharmacy, working as a janitor, working as a Little League umpire, working at basketball camps, writing a sports column for the local newspaper, just a full range of jobs because, in some ways I was a little bit bored, and I also wanted to push myself. And in that environment, everything was possible to kind of go do. And so for me, as I kind of look back now, I really have come to appreciate and to recognize just how fortunate I was to have that kind of environment to grow up in. It just allowed me to really kind of to develop a lot more self-confidence and just kind of push myself forward. So, in a lot of ways, I was really, really lucky.
Likewise, you mentioned that you lived all over the world and you've really been immersed in many different cultures. How have those experiences shaped your view of the world and contributed to who you are today?
Well, tremendously. As I left Indiana and made my way to Chicago and then eventually to New York and then found myself living in New Delhi and then to Paris and then to Indonesia, each one of those steps really kind of exposed me to a much more interesting and culturally diverse world. And I think about the first time after college, and I was moving to Chicago, and the Sunday before I was going to start my job, I walked up to this building, which was the Equitable Building by the river off of Michigan Avenue. And I think it's like a 25, maybe 30-story building. And I remember looking up at it, and I felt so intimidated by the moment and so kind of unworthy in a lot of ways. Very similar to the way I felt when I was a freshman in college, where I didn't feel as prepared for that moment as maybe some other people that had grown up in slightly more sophisticated, more advanced, more educational type environments. And I just remember thinking like, wow, this is a huge moment, for me. And I wasn't 100% certain I could do it. And I did it. And, I think just like with college and each step in my career, until maybe about 5 years ago, I got over being a little paranoid about my capabilities. I just think with each step, I just developed a little bit more confidence, and that was really exhilarating and has been really kind of helpful to me. And so by the time I lived abroad, I was already starting, to have the confidence that's necessary to be able to find my path and to be really kind of open to the environment and to absorb it, take advantage of everything that was being offered. And so, Paris was really the first kind of truly challenging moment for me because I didn't really speak French. I spoke enough, but not very well. And, I had to really kind of struggle and fight my way through it. And I eventually became very proficient and somewhat bilingual at that time in French. And, was able to work and really have a really great experience. And once I kind of got through that, I was like, okay, I can do anything. I'm a competent human being who can find challenges and figure my way through it. And I think that's such a gift to get, as you kind of develop as a person and you develop your career.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you. And a huge traveler myself, although I haven't lived abroad as much as I'd like, but, perhaps in the future.
Definitely do it. I highly recommend it for everyone.
So besides the successes with, investing, and the thing that you're most sort of well known for is About.me. And About.me was famously acquired 4 days after launch, after the official launch, and was growing like crazy. Can you talk about your vision for starting the company, why it was growing so quickly, and how many users you had at the time of acquisition?
Yeah. So, About.me is a lot of ways, kind of a bit the love of my life at this point. It still has a lot of challenges in front of it, and who knows how that will kind of navigate through that. But, it's always been something that's been very dear to me. I've for a long time had a thesis around public identity. And one of the things that I saw happening with the acceleration of usage and adoption of these social networks was that our personalities are kind of, they're in slivers, right? They're very fractionalized. And I'm kind of one person in LinkedIn. I'm another person in Facebook or Instagram. I'm even yet another person in Twitter. And they're all real. They're all authentic to who I am, but none of them really kind of capture what I'll call a holistic picture of who I am. And so I always felt that everybody in the world, just like in the 1950s, everybody wanted to be listed in the phone book. I just feel like everybody in the world should have at minimum a very simple kind of personal page or a website on the web that's accessible. We meet people, we work with people, and the first thing that we typically do is we go Google search them or we try to find out about them, and if we're interested to learn more. And, I think outsourcing your identity to Google, and Google, which is a really great company, but outsourcing that into their algorithms is just a little mind-boggling to me. It's something that I should control. And I should be pointing people to a page that's simply about me, who I am as a person, what I do professionally, what I look like, and where you can learn more about me in those specific services such as, Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and all that stuff, which I can connect. And then we also enable people to email directly from your page to you. So it allows people that I don't know per se, but may have an interest in reaching me, and I might have an interest in being reached. And it matches up and enables us to connect. So I think what we're doing at About.me nails that. And I think we're just the best at doing that. As we've grown the company, and it's quite sizable at this point in terms of the users, still quite small in terms of its revenue base and its business model. So those are the things that we're focused on. But as we've grown it, we've learned a lot about our user base. And what we've figured out is that people that are freelancers, 1099ers, people that have a side hustle, solopreneurs, people that have a passion side project, those type of people, our product serves incredibly well, and I think probably better than anybody else. Those type of people, typically, they don't need a big, heavy website with multiple pages and complexity and hard to kind of keep up to date. What they need is just a simple kind of splash page that captures the things that I talked about that we do at About.me. If we meet and you're interested in learning more about me and you go to my Twitter page, that's not at any given time, that potentially is not a great representation of who I am. It's a great representation of what I'm thinking in that moment. And sometimes I say stupid things or funny things or things that don't come across as clever, on Twitter, just probably like anybody else who's active, on that platform. And I think that if you land on my page, and right now, like a lot of people in Silicon Valley, I'm a little up in arms about our current government and blah, blah, blah. Not everybody agrees with that, right? A lot of the people I grew up with don't agree with that. And I'm respectful of those kind of different opinions. And so I'm saying it on Twitter. And if that's your first interaction with me, it doesn't make you want to actually engage with me. And it's not a great way for you to get to know me. And by no means does my political views represent who I am, right? They're a piece of who I am, and they're an important piece of who I am, but they're part of the puzzle. They're part of the broader context. And so what I would prefer is that people get to my Twitter page via my About.me page, because they've learned a lot more about me and kind of my story and who I am and what matters to me and what I'm working on. And they see me from a much broader perspective. And then they can go into those very specific, slivers of who I am, my professional acumen or my personal, kind of rants or political views or whatever all that stuff is. It's all part of my DNA and part of who I am as a person, but none of that should solely define me. The only person who should define me is myself. The only service I know of that does that incredibly well in a simplified manner is the product that we've built with About.me. That's why I continue to love it.
Absolutely. I also need to comment that About.me might be the best straightforward product name I've ever seen. I mean, even in our conversation right now, you want to learn about me, we're saying it all the time, and it's so easy to remember. And I think the .me part of it, when I learned about.me, was really one of the first sites that made me realize not everything is a .com or that there was another option.
Yeah, thank you. That was done by design. In fact, when Ryan Freitas, Tim Young, and myself were starting it, I think that, what was important to us was this name, and almost to a point to where we would not have started the company if we could not have had that name. And the .me actually was preferable to the .com. AboutMe.com didn't flow. And the About.me just felt like, even though the .me is not a domain that was well known at the time, it just felt like it put the emphasis on the me aspect. This is my page. This is about me. It just felt like it was such a natural fit. And so we were very fortunate with the domain.me people, which are from Montenegro, that they believed in us to a degree that they would let us have this name. These kind of names are always on lockdown. They're always reserved for big companies or political purposes or tourism in this particular case. And they're very valuable.
Definitely. So About.me was, as I mentioned, famously acquired 4 days after the official launch. I'm curious about why you decided to be acquired when you did, and as things played out, do you feel it was acquired too early?
Yeah, we definitely were acquired too early in hindsight. And even in the moment, I kind of felt that. What happened was was just becoming a public company, and Tim Armstrong is the CEO still today, but was the CEO. And Tim and I, had a relationship. I was an advisor to AOL as they were making that transition. And they approached us with the idea that we join their company. And it was incredibly early on. By the time we completed the acquisition, you're accurate, it was only 4 days. But, the company had been around for about 4 months. We'd been working on it very quietly. We just hadn't launched our product yet publicly. But they made us an offer. And the offer was very substantial, given the context of the stage that we were at. And to be honest, when I thought about the team, it made a really big impact financially on their lives. And it made an impact on mine as well. But I'd been fortunate enough to had some success prior to that, right? With my previous company, Sphere, which also sold for a great multiple, and my venture successes. So the money aspect wasn't the primary driver for me, but it was important to me when I thought about the context of my team, who had not had those experiences before. And then I think what happened was I talked myself a little bit into it because, I felt like we could get to scale. I felt like About.me is the type of product that should be scale, a very large company footprint. And, AOL had AIM, and they have AOL Mail, and just places which would be natural integration points for us that I thought would help us scale the product much faster. Once we were acquired, and I think it's no fault of AOL, who was nothing but incredibly supportive and generous to us, bent over backwards to be accommodating and welcoming. I realized that they had such substantial problems with those two particular products that us actually ever really doing a meaningful, exciting integration was never going to really happen. So, because they had bigger problems to kind of figure out. And so, as I kind of came to that realization after about a year, I started a dialogue back with Tim and the team about us spinning it back out and buying it, and AOL, being a minority, small minority shareholder, and in exchange for us foregoing some monies and things like that. And it took a while. It took about 9 months to make that happen. But, we kind of stuck at it, and we had what I'll call very good, constructive adult conversations that was sometimes hard to have. You don't want to be here. Why don't you want to be here? All that kind of stuff. And it wasn't like, well, that's not the case. We just want to build a great company. And it's hard for us to do that in this context. So the right thing to do is to let it kind of go free and let it become its own thing. And so, we were fortunate, and I'm always incredibly indebted to Tim and those guys because they allowed us to buy it back. And we've been able to work on it for the last 3 years. So, it all kind of, it's a story where it all has kind of ended well.
Definitely. So kind of jumping over to True Ventures is a little bit different in that until recently it seemed atypical for VCs to back non-tech companies like Blue Bottle, for instance.
Sure.
At what point did it click that Blue Bottle was going to be an investment?
Well, I think for us, we have theses like everybody else, but we don't have a particular thesis around segments. And so I think what we're most interested in is backing founders of movements and products and services that kind of capture our imagination. And I think that all of a sudden opens us up to exploring lots of different things, lots of weird things, lots of things that are kind of right down the center, but lots of stuff out there on the periphery for sure. And things like Blue Bottle, which most VC investors were not investing in coffee companies, when we did it. Subsequently, they've invested in other brands. But I think what we saw was a tremendous founder in James Freeman who had a purpose and had a cachet to the way that he approached the coffee industry that really aligned itself well with potentially a massively scaled opportunity. And James, when I dug into the story, he wasn't just building a cafe, right? He has an incredible vision around what that cafe should be and what the Bottle brand should stand for. And, it starts with, where do you procure the beans, and working with small lot farmers that adhere to organic principles and who adhere to the strongest standards or the highest standards of sustainability. It's getting those beans, and then it's how do we store them, and then how do we roast them. And once we roast them, what's our viewpoint around when they should be consumed? We have a freshness policy at Blue Bottle, which almost nobody has. After 10 days, we throw away the beans. If they haven't sold, which they always, by the way, now we have a good problem. They're always all selling, but boy, there's been times where they didn't all sell, and we take them off the shelf flat out, right? We won't serve beans beyond that time frame. So, and then this whole philosophy around one cup at a time, not making the coffee in advance just so it's quick, which is utilitarian. That's not what James is interested in. He's interested in creating a beautiful experience, one that's rooted in great hospitality, but also a delicious product. All the way down to espresso drinks. Espresso drinks should be consumed on premise because they should be consumed in a certain type of ceramic cup because that retains temperature in a different way, and they should be consumed at that temperature. So all kinds of different little quirky things that maybe people think about, no small, medium, larges, no flavorings, all that stuff, just really simplifying that experience for the consumer and delivering something that was incredibly beautiful. And so as I heard him tell that story, and then digging into the team, which was Brian Meehan, who's a good friend of mine, who was going to join as an active chairman, meaning an operating chairman being involved, not just figurehead. David Bowman, who was our CFO and COO. It just felt like the combination of these people had an opportunity to build a business that can be very significant in terms of scale. The thing when we finally agreed to make the investment, the last question was that question about scale. And the way that I thought about it, and I think it's correct now, is that every single place in the world where you see a Starbucks, if you were to open a coffee shop that's similar to Blue Bottle or Blue Bottle across the street, how would that coffee shop do? And the answer is that coffee shop would do incredibly well. In fact, we know this answer, right? Even though we do not open across the street from Starbucks. But we just know that no matter how many units they have, we also have an opportunity to have that many units. And eventually, right? And it's 100% possible. And Starbucks is an $85 billion market cap company. So this is a multi-billion dollar type company that we're building. And what I love about it today is, you fast forward and we've had crazy success, and we're on our way to 50, 60 cafes this year that are incredibly profitable and doing very well, is that we've always have adhered to the guiding principles that James has for his vision of this business. And that's what's exciting about Blue Bottle specifically, and that's what's exciting when we get to work with founders like Matt Mullenweg at WordPress, or John Foley at Peloton, or James Park at Fitbit, or Amy Arrett at Madison Reed, or Doug Song at Duo Security. I mean, we have a lot of massive scale companies, and the commonality is that they all have these type of founders that have the capacity to be a founder of a movement within their category. And it's really, really, really impressive.
Absolutely. You mentioned WordPress as well, and that is another incredible success story. And I guess powers over like 30% of all the websites on the internet.
Yeah. More than 30%.
Yeah, I think it was, in your talk, it was like almost 32. It was just mind blowing. How did you meet Matt, and how did you know it was going to take over the web?
Well, I didn't know it was going to take over the web. I just knew that Matt was a once in a generation type founder, right? There's dozens of them each year. So it's not literally once in a generation, but he's that type of founder. We met indirectly through Malik, who's my partner at True now. Was writing an article on a company that I had been the lead investor in called Oddpost. He was putting that company on the cover of Business 2.0 back in the day when that was a big major tech publication. It was a big deal. And, I met and he kind of casually, I asked him at the end when I was at the elevator, I asked him what was happening, which I always ask people. And he's like, this personal, I think he called it personal diary, web logging or something like that at the time. And he told me about it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And, I asked him who the good companies were. And he said, well, there's Typekit or Movable Type, Live Journal. And then there's this really interesting thing that's open source, he said something press. And so I just kind of went back and, looked into it and Googled it. And there was this thing called WordPress. It was super small, but it was open source. And, I got an introduction to Matt and we just started talking on the phone and we talked for a long time, for a really long time, when I say it a long time, not each call, but like over a long period of time, we had multiple calls. And then when he moved here, or when he was thinking about moving here, we finally physically met. By that time, I think he was 20. And I just kind of helped him navigate. And I didn't do it with a particular motive. I just liked him. And I felt like he was such an incredibly special potential founder, that he was just somebody that, somehow we wanted to be supportive of or be involved with in lots of different ways, as a mentor, as a friend, as an investor, whatever that was. And it's one of the luckiest, awesome things that's happened to me as a professional and as a person. There's nobody I work with that I have so many different lenses of different types of relationships that I have than what I have with Matt. I've been his advisor. He's been my advisor. I've been his investor. We're friends. We've been co-investors in companies. Just lots of different things that we've done. And he's now a robust 32, I think. And I'm no longer 32 for sure. And what a fantastic experience to be a part of.
Definitely. You have this, superpower of being able to identify great founders. Have you been able to pinpoint or distill what that quality is?
Well, I don't know if I have such an amazing superpower, I've been fortunate. I think in a lot of ways, from my very first, investments to these last ones, it's always been dependent on community and just kind of being in the flow and getting to know people and having a sense of who has the capacity to do something amazing. And, I've had lots of misses, but what I'm proud to say is, while I've had a few misses on people who, after working with them, I was super disappointed. It's really rare, even in those businesses that haven't worked out or have had modest success, I haven't regretted the decision that I made about the founder or founders. And I felt like they've been everything that I hoped they would be and as magical as I thought they would be. Just sometimes it doesn't work out because the idea is just not meant to be, or there's too much headwind, or there's just not enough luck in terms of pairing your timing. So for me, it's really just about finding those people. And, I've been lucky. When I look at my friends, I have lots of different friends and lots of different friend groups, like everybody. I've been incredibly fortunate. I grew up in the web in a period where it transitioned from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 to whatever it is today. And, I have lots of Katerina Fake, who's, the founder of Flickr, and Dick Costello, who was at Feedburner at the time, and Evan Williams, who was doing Blogger, and Stuart Butterfield, who's now doing Slack, but was doing Flickr in the day. Like, these are, and there's so many more, right? These are just people that were all just kind of we're all kind of like each other, and that we're just capable. We're in a really magical environment here in the Bay Area, and we're thinking about solving problems, and we've been lucky to go solve some of those problems. And it's always kind of cool when you think like, oh, well, I knew Evan when he was thinking like, how do I buy a burrito tonight, And I was at a stage where I was thinking like, how do I make my mortgage payment in 7 months? And we're very fortunate. It's worked out.
Absolutely. Another thing I noticed is that philanthropy is something that is very important to you.
Hugely so.
Can you talk about the organizations that you're involved with and why that work is so important?
Yeah, so I'm on the Tony Hawk Foundation board. My wife is on the Berkeley Art Museum board. We're also supporters of Southern Exposure, which is a large local organization supporting artists, local artists who are in that weird transition stage of trying to figure out like how to maintain their day job so they can pay their rent and how to get shows and things like that, right? But are super talented. And then there's lots of other things where we're, tangentially or just, a little bit more subtly and discreetly, supportive of, including lots of individuals where we've taken interest in them and try to provide them with assistance to kind of move to another stage in their career or in their life. But I think, this particular community, like lots of different communities, is incredibly fortunate in that there's a lot of wealth that's being created and can accrue to those people that have been lucky and fortunate enough to have outcomes. And I think that, just we as a forward-thinking society, we have a responsibility to ourselves to kind of find within what is important to us, and then to, apply our time if we don't have financial resources or our kind of money and financial resources. And, it's just always been something that's been really kind of core to me. What I get particularly excited about is this intersection of youth and culture. And that kind of really is very similar to the way I think about investing, right? I'm investing in a lot of youth or younger entrepreneurs, typically. And they're typically also doing something that's going to impact culture in a very fundamental way or participate in culture. The Tony Hawk Foundation was really an excellent fit for me because in addition to those aspects, it's also very local, serving local communities. And I like that. I like to be able to understand, the impact. So while there's other organizations which are much more, international per se, those are probably, thank goodness those exist, and I'm glad that they're being supported. It's just it's not the place for me, right? The place I want to support is those things that impact my local community in a profound way. So, I think doing that and then finding the right balance of being open about it and talking about it versus being anonymous and yet not be self-aggrandizing, I think it's a hard balance to always kind of figure out. And hopefully I'm skating within the right realm of where that should be, right? Because I think by being vocal about it appropriately so, it sends a message to others that here's something for you to think about, as maybe you become fortunate. How do you behave? Is it about going and buying yourself glitzy new watch or house or boat or car or whatever? Yeah, well, fine. If that's what you want to go do, fine. And there's no problem with doing that. I've done plenty of those kinds of things. But also make sure that you figure out the right balance with giving back. And I just think if we all could find that balance, it'd just be such a much more amazing world that we live in. So I'm trying to do my little part.
Definitely. I completely agree with you. And those are some great organizations to support. I'd love to jump into the quick fire round, and it's an opportunity to kind of learn more about yourself and the usual things that people don't generally ask.
Okay.
I'd love to know about what your favorite book is.
Oh, I love Shackleton's Journey. So Shackleton's Journey is a great story about a group of men, in this particular case, who set out on a journey to discover the South Pole before it had been discovered. And they fail in their attempt, but they find themselves stuck in an ice pack, I think, for almost nearly 2 years. And they survive, and every single person survives. And not only is it just an epic story to read, it's a true story, and it's exciting, it's fun, it's riveting, but at the same time, it also has a lot of meaning around leadership and also the consequences of isolation and what happened to lots of these people once they re-entered into the mainstream world. And just there's just lots of just really interesting textures about it. So I love that book. I'm reading a great book right now about Trevor Noah called Born a Crime, and about apartheid and his experience of growing up in South Africa all the way to him becoming the host of The Daily Show. And just, amazing story.
So you've had a lot of really interesting jobs. What's been your favorite and least favorite eclectic job?
So many weird jobs. I don't think there's any of them I didn't like, to be honest. I think some of them are kind of like cool that I was able to do that. And then some of them are like, wow, that's really humbling that you were able to do that. And I'm proud of that kind of in hindsight, So I think the hardest thing that I ever, did was just being a janitor. And, I was a janitor at my college because, I didn't have a lot of money when I went to school, and it was a way of making, some spending money on the side. And that's a pretty humbling moment when you're doing something like that. It's a very humanizing moment because there's a gazillion people doing this, and it just helps you to develop a level of empathy, which is really important and applies to lots of different aspects of your life or my life. As an example, when I'm down at Crissy Field, which is a local beach here in the Bay Area, and I work out quite frequently, there's park rangers and there's people that come in and clean the public toilets, and they empty the trash cans, and they do those jobs. And, I don't think anybody ever says thank you. I always say thank you. I've done that job, right? Not that specific job, but I get it. And I'm so appreciative that they do that because it makes my experience possible. Sometimes I get down there and I have to go to the restroom or, just whatever. And it's like, it has such an impact on me and all of us. And it's yet nobody is ever appreciative. And I'm appreciative because I've actually have been that person. The funnest job I ever had, that was one I didn't see coming, was that I was a yogurt merchandiser when I lived in France. And so when I moved to Paris, I realized that my French was not at the proficiency it needed to be. And so I asked the company I worked with if I could get a job outside of Paris. And so we started looking around, and one of the obvious areas was to work in sales. And as they correctly pointed out, your French isn't strong enough for you to work in sales. So maybe you shouldn't start there. But they offered me a job I ended up living in the southernmost part of France near Perpignan. It's where Loic Lemur, who's a Frenchman who was in our community, comes from. And I ended up moving there, and I would go and I would clean the grocery shelves and restock them and help put together a strategic plan for how they would make their yogurt category in their aisles more profitable, right? And have higher turns. But I would have never thought I'd be wearing a little blue jacket with my name, Tony, written on it, and gloves, and, waking up and driving to an account at 11 o'clock at night and cleaning, taking everything off their shelves and helping them clean down the shelves, and then figuring out how to implement a restocking of those shelves, and leaving at 4 or 5 in the morning and going and eating merguez sausage, with the team. What an incredible experience for me as a young person. So those are a couple of odd things. There's a lot more.
Super interesting to me. You've been all over the world, and so where's one place that you'd love to live or visit that you haven't been to before?
Oh, there's a bunch of places that I haven't been that I'd love to visit. Buenos Aires is one of them for sure. I have some intrigues, maybe some palace intrigue about going to Russia, but I feel like I'm pretty well traveled at this point. I've seen almost everything in Europe and most of Asia, and bits and pieces of South America. And I'd also very much covet spending time in Africa, and that's on my bucket list to spend several months in Africa. In terms of living, I'd love to live in Tokyo. That's my new kind of obsession. So I think it would be fun to live there.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite cities in the world, actually. We've come to sort of the end of the interview and my questions, but I'd love to give you this time to plug anything that you like. And yeah.
Well, listen, I obviously love About.me.
Yep.
I think, we've covered a lot of different stuff here, so I won't overly plug, but I think the real opportunity is for people to really take note of their own story, no matter how horrible it's been or how great it's been, but to really kind of take stock and to understand it better and to take pride in it and be humble about it and to kind of put that story forth, because it's helpful for lots of different people, and it's helpful for yourself to kind of wrap yourself around it mentally. I think About.me is an amazing product that helps to kind of scratch a little bit that surface of that idea. So anyways, I hope everybody out there will go set up an About.me page and then email me and let me know.
Definitely. I need to update mine as well, but yeah, it's a great product, and I'll put it on my business card next.
That would be great.
Awesome. Well, I just really want to thank you for your time today. And, before I do any interview, I love to kind of do some research and talk to people and stuff. And I'm out here in New York for Stocktoberfest and getting some input from like Gary and Howard and a bunch of other investors here. And everybody loves working with you. And I've just had such a great time speaking with you today. So for what it's worth, it's been an incredible experience.
I really, really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So this has been the VentureForth podcast with Tony Conrad of True Ventures and About.me. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe to the VentureForth podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. You can also follow at VentureForth Pod on Twitter for our latest updates. As always, I'm your host, Joe Mahavutivani, and thank you for listening to the VentureForth podcast.